So thank you so much, Marilyn, and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for spending the day with us. We are really looking forward to a productive day. I really want to thank Marilyn. I also want to thank the co-chairs of this effort in terms of its inclusion in the Action Collaborative as part of the Drug Forum. So I want to thank Kate Nobile and Tanisha Carino from FasterCures and Kate's from GSK. I also really want to thank the National Academies staff. So I want to thank Carolyn and Morgan for helping to organize this, as well as the larger planning committee and the entire Drug Forum, who's been very supportive over this effort for the last year plus. So I want to take a few minutes to lay out where we've been and where we hope to go. And I'm going to keep it very high level because we've got a lot of work today to do, and I don't want to take up too much time. But hopefully, because you're all in this room, you're aware that there is a movement to include patient perspectives in drug development. If you're not, there's the door. But we really define, I want to lay out some definitions in terms of the way that we've thought about the science of patient input. And we really define it as the development and use of systematic approaches and tools to collect, analyze, and apply patient input to medical product R&D lifecycle and regulatory decision making. So that's sort of the way in which we're thinking about it, really systematically collecting this input and this important, valuable information because patients are expert in their disease and condition and the treatments that they take. So FasterCures put out this, but I want to say that this is what I'm most familiar with, but we know that many organizations in this room have worked on similar efforts to map out what we need to know and where we need to go. And so we know that an enriched understanding, for example, of disease burden or natural history of disease is not just important to patients, it's important to our research. It's important to understanding and developing products that are going to work for people and have the best impact. But we know that we need to do a better job of eliciting these concepts, of understanding these concepts hearing directly from patients and their caregivers about the symptoms that they experience, their experience with their treatments, and some of the views that they have and expectations of benefit and how they deal with uncertainty, for example. And we know that we now have, with some methods, both old and new, opportunities to collect this information directly and indirectly from patients and caregivers. So I really want to pause here because we recognize that there's a lot of different expertise in this room. Some of you may look at this and think, I have spent my career working on some of these issues. And some of you may think, I'm so excited this new day has finally come. So I want to just acknowledge that sort of difference and mosaic of expertise that we have in the room and say that I think we can all agree that this is actually not the reality at scale for how we develop medical products. I think we can all agree at least that this is not the way that the system works systematically across the system at scale, not yet. And so that is actually why we're here, is that we're all chipping away at this, whether we've been doing it for 20 years or whether we've been doing it for 2. And we're all trying to get to this same goal. So where are we currently? Well, if imitation and or stealing is the best form of flattery, Cyndi has done a lot. Clinical Trials Transformation Initiative, as well as many others in the room, have done a lot of really great work. And I noticed there is, as I acknowledge that there are people who've really worked hard on establishing the good practices of patient engagement. DIAB is actually not a new organization. That's a complete typo. That's supposed to be DIA. Just in case you were like, who's that newcomer? But we basically have sort of these 2 tiers of activity that I think are really interconnected. That is trying to establish how we conduct patient engagement in a way that is meaningful and true and valuable to all parties. And what happens when we do that? How do we know we're doing it well? What kind of impact does that have on the system? But really, I think where we're going to focus a little bit today, although we can kind of talk broadly also about all of this, are examples really to drive the research methods, data collection, and use to systematically collect this input from patients to answer these key questions that will drive our medical product development forward. And so what's kind of exciting about this as well is that, while this chevron has been something that when I first started in my position, and I know very well this pipeline, we know that it's really more of a life cycle. And so even our language over the last, 5, 8 years or so has really changed in terms of the way we think about medical product development. And so I want to walk you through a little bit of examples in both of these areas, just so that we can all have a sense of where the science is and where it's emerging, and where the practice is going. In terms of initiatives for good practice, there's a lot of examples I could name here. I really want to give a strong shout out to the real hard work that the National Academies put into developing that landscape that you all saw in your pre-reads, and I've pulled these directly from there. But I have even a hot off the presses example from the patient-focused medicines development recently published. I think yesterday they sort of released their practices in patient engagement and their quality framework in terms of how to make sure that this is high-quality efforts. So we even have something to add for 2018. So this is an emerging and ever-growing area. The second is really thinking about initiatives aimed at regulatory and product development. And we have worked very closely, and many of you in this room have worked really closely with the FDA on developing some of these guidance documents, white papers, sort of thought pieces about how to work closely with the regulatory bodies and ensure that the product development pipeline is more robust in terms of taking into account patient perspectives. And then finally, I think this is where I get particularly excited about the sustainability of the effort, because if we have data systems and capacity, then we really have the opportunity to take things to scale. And so these are sort of emerging efforts to make sure that we have the platforms for data collection and that we're kind of keeping up with a science, having this repository of the scientific evidence, for example, as it unfolds. And many organizations responsible for that are in this room. So as Marilyn mentioned, we have a particular focus for this workshop, and Mark will lead us through all of that. But some of the things that we heard in terms of where the field's at right now is this need to include patient input earlier in the product life cycle, earlier in the R&D phase. That we know that there are differing needs for data rigor, validity, representativeness, depending on where you are in the product life cycle and what you're trying to do. We heard that regulatory decision-making is important, but we want to take a broader perspective and make sure that the entire system is held sort of accountable, if you will, to making sure that the data can be used for all sorts of decision-making. We hope that regulatory kind of grade evidence would be used, but we may need other approaches as well. To think about using it in decision-making, and then building the science of patient input. Where are the gaps are what we're really going to focus on today. But moving forward, we want to think about how do you build capacity, again, to take this to scale. And so we're going to really be focusing, as Marilyn said, on some of the gaps, what's not there, which is sometimes that's actually, I think, the more challenging thing to do, is to see what, it's kind of like the unknowns or something like that. It's sort of, how do you see what's not there? But hopefully we'll dig into that today. But in terms of where we want to go moving forward, I think we've done a really nice job coming together as a community over the last several years. Hopefully today is that moment where we're kind of keeping you together. We've brought you together yet again to hopefully have a little bit of a different conversation to progress the work. But really, long term, it's going to be working together to demonstrate success. And that's going to include making sure that we have a variety of expertise at the table to actually bring the data to scale, to know that we're analyzing it, to use it in decision making. And I think we all can think about our organizations or the organizations that we partner with and think, are we really set up? If we could sort of magically snap our fingers and have that first slide that I showed be the reality of the way that medical products are developed, are our organizations set up? Do you have the expertise you need? Do you have the knowledge management systems? Do you have the data collection systems? Is the data good and where you need it to be? Could you access it if you wanted to? And who would analyze it? And who would be thinking through the challenges? And who's there to set up to learn as we learn, right? Because it's not going to be static. It's going to be ever growing. So as we collect more data, we learn, we analyze, we apply it in our decision making, we learn, we continue to learn. So do you have the workforce there and the team set up to be able to do that? So I think that's where we want to go ultimately. That's the scale, that's the sustainability model. But today is really the focus on how do we understand the gaps? What do we not know? What do we need to know to sort of start to set up that model of, is there going to be, can we have a research agenda down the road where we say these are the questions we need to answer, and then build the workforce to answer it. And so that's kind of the broad vision. And again, I just really thank you for coming today on behalf of Marilyn and the Planning Committee. And I will turn it over to our fearless leader, Mark. Oh. How'd I do on time? Did I do well?
You're on yellow. You're doing really well.
Nice.
It
Okay.
didn't hit red.
Yes.
So, yes.
Great.
Public feedback, right? Green, yellow, when they hit red, it's time to stop. So thank you, Cyndi.
Thank you.
And all that.